Hi, everyone. I'm Eric. I'll be moderating the conversation today, joined by my colleagues at Basic. So I guess just one by one, introducing everyone here. Erwin, creative director. Any words from you?
Nope.
Cool,
Thanks for joining. Uh,
cool.
it's awesome to have like 118 people in
I
here
know.
listening to us. Honestly,
It's
thank
a
you.
little overwhelming, but we're here. We'll make it work. Emma Santangelo, strategist.
Hey guys. Yeah, we're gonna be awkward and goofy as you've already probably caught on to. So thanks for being here and enjoying the ride with us tonight. It's gonna be fun.
Yep, it's going to be a long hour, y'all. So thanks for joining us. And last but not least, Andrew Yanisek, our lovely group creative director.
Excited to have everybody. Thanks for joining. Hopefully it's not a long hour. Hopefully it's a quick hour. The conversation's engaging, but we'll see how it goes.
We'll make it fly.
It's gonna
We
be
promise.
a long.
Cool. So I guess just teeing off the conversation, today we really just want to talk about the role of responsibility in design and the role of responsibility in creation, just as a whole in the creative industry. So, as a design agency at Basic, we realize that our job is to really just solve problems in culture. And as we all know, this year in 2020, which has been such a rough year to say the least, our systems have failed us. Our cultural systems, our social systems have all failed us, right? All these injustices. So as an agency, how can we then, and even as designers and creators or whatever, strategists as well, how can we rebuild these systems to work for everyone, to make a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive world, and with our work as well. So that said, I guess I'll just pass it off to the team with a question. We're built on an industry of pandering, really. That's kind of the basis of a lot of marketing, unfortunately. So what are some ways we unconsciously perpetuate these biases and stereotypes in our work? And how can we then be more intentional about representation and inclusivity? So whoever wants to take the baton and really just tee it off, please have at it. The floor is yours.
Oh, just to unpack that for a second, like when you say we're built on a dick for everyone, like when you say we're built on an industry of pandering, I think there's like a little bit of a hop and a skip that we've made in terms of like making that leap. And just to unpack that,
Yeah.
we were having a conversation about this a little bit earlier, and there was a realization that, when the process of marketing to people, the process of trying to dig into a culture and trying to understand it and organize it is a process of generalization, right? We're taking a culture of people or a group of people, and we're trying to simplify them down to their commonalities in order to connect with them in a lot of ways, or show them things that they're interested in. And I think that, maybe that's a negative way of looking at what we do, but it is a reality of a little bit of how we start to look at people, look at the people that we're trying to connect with or build tools for, or whatever it may be, in the process of design or artistry. And so to get back to a little bit of your question, Eric, I think it's really interesting. Like, how do we stop that? I think like the first step is like really being aware of the fact that we're doing that. I think we all sort of operate in this lens that it's like, that's the process that we do to create effective design solutions, to create effective commercial art for that matter. And awareness is like a key factor in that, because at the end of the day, we are making tools for people, and it is helpful to understand a little bit about their needs, wants, and desires, but we also are ignoring a little bit of the nuance that exists in the cultures that we're trying to talk to. And so when I think about how could we avoid that to the best of our ability, I think the one thing that popped out to me was really trying to reflect the marginal when we reflect sort of some of the commonalities. We try and build tools for, hey, here's what these people all have in common, here's what they share. But it would be really important for us to consider, like, well, what are the other aspects of this culture that are underrepresented, that don't get reflected when we go through our sort of process and go, oh, this is what they all have in common. Well, maybe we should talk about what do they have, what don't they have in common, and how can we reflect those things as well.
Yep. And real quick, just as a plug for everything, on the bottom for all the attendees, you'll see that there's a little Q&A box. So if you do have questions throughout, like please feel free to type them in and we'll field them at the end. So yep. Continue on, everyone.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, to build on that, I think as a strategist here, representing that side of things, like part of the job is to create personas, right? Because it's like, when we're creating campaigns or we're building websites or designing products or whatever the creative medium is, the shorthand is to kind of figure out, okay, well, who are these groups of people, right? And I think what you're saying is really interesting. I think the way that society is changing, the way that technology has made things more accessible is that old model, not only from like a societal standpoint and everything, with our current climate is going on, but also just from a work standpoint, it's not really easy to just say, hey, this is a group of people, because people are showing their dynamism and contributing to this dynamic, multifaceted self in so many more ways now, right? Even on social media and just how people are expressing themselves. And so I think, not only does it do us a disservice to group people because we miss out on the nuances of their, who they are as individuals, but also, it's a damper sometimes on the creative idea and potential for where the creative can go, right? But at the same time, having a balance that, we're talking to individuals, and I think the beauty of design specifically is we're talking to individuals, but we're also talking to wide swaths of people, right? So it's a challenge to sometimes navigate how do you, to your point, like acknowledge these differences and then design and create for those, but also know that there is common ground, right? And every situation is completely different, but I think that's something that we all face in our own mediums within the work that we do. And it's something that I think we're always navigating, but is a really interesting thought, like how to celebrate the differences and bring them to light through the things that we do. Chapstick break for Erwin.
Yeah, no, I do like to build off of what you're saying. I think it's really interesting is, the cultures that we are trying to market to. I think the things that are unique about those cultures are how those cultures progress forward. And so our responsibility, or not our responsibility, but there is a contribution that we can make as catalysts of culture in some way, as designers, to say, hey, here's something really interesting that's happening in this culture that maybe some of you don't know about yet. And we want to reflect that and incorporate it in the work that we do. And, a positive thing that can come out of it is, hey, well, maybe we help progress that culture forward rather than just reflect exactly what it looks like today, and embolden sort of this is a negative word, but the stereotype that we all are looking for in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly. And I think like the biggest thing that we can do in order to do that is to listen, like I think that this is sort of obvious, right? But like the work that we do is a conversation, right? And so, that shorthand of trying to put people together isn't really listening. It's like it's taking a shortcut to say, hey, and there's times when it's necessary, right? To just help simplify problems or to think about ways to like compartmentalize information. But to really create great work and great design, I think listening and having a conversation, again, no matter what the medium is really where it all begins. And I think, we were talking the other day, just as a brand example, which is most people are probably familiar with, but in terms of, product design and branding and how a company grew, I mean, Glossier is a great example of just getting real-time feedback about who people were, what they cared about, what they were responding to when products were created, how they wanted to feel more included, if there was something that wasn't representing who they were, their skin type, their body type, their needs, whatever it was, like they would then go and innovate their product and innovate how that was marketed to them. And it really, they're still growing. And I think it's a testament to that listening, from the brand to the consumer and thinking about how it applies to design. Because I think that's something that, design is a conversation, right? Not to use a cliche, but it really is. I mean, it's a communication tool between two people. And when we build those things, it's like, we have to take the other piece into consideration.
Yeah, I would say like another one would also be like Fenty. And so to like lay a foundation for like where I come from in this discussion and topic, it goes back to, I was on a panel yesterday where we talked about how do you create equitable and inclusive spaces and the role of space within the defining of who we are. And so while that was talking and speaking mainly about physical space and the role of physical space in defining our current identity, as well as how we see ourselves in the future, we as digital designers in the digital space, or even print designers in the print space, we are creating the spaces that a lot of people actually interact in right now. A lot of people interact in their phone. A lot of people conversate in their phone and have communication with one another in their phone, or even through media or through campaigns are interacting with the brand, and they're seeing themselves represented. And so when you look at the role of race and diversity within those spaces, it becomes hyper important that you actually express the nuances, because as, for example, me as a Black man growing up, what I learned in school was not about my culture, not about my race, not about the nuances and diversity and the collectiveness and richness about my race. And so all I would learn, if I didn't learn it from my family, all I would learn and see of myself would be what media shows me. So it'd be people playing basketball, people rapping, people being gangsters and thugs. And what that does is actually frames my perception of who I can be in the future. And so the role of actually painting a more nuanced picture of cultures within advertising and within marketing and within websites and all of these spaces is really, really important. It's not just about creating things that win awards, look good, or even sell more product. At the end of the day, we are actually shaping the perception of the world around us, and in turn shaping the perception of ourselves into the future. And so the reason I was bringing up something like Fenty is like, Fenty represents people of all colors, shapes, sizes, and it allows people to see themselves as more than what other brands narrowed them into, right? Even right now where they're saying like men care about skin, like they're taking this like spin and they're actually making it okay and allowing you and allowing us to see ourselves as something more because they recognize nuance. And I think it goes back to what you're saying, like they listen, as well as they're coming from a place of diverse understanding. So it wasn't something that had to be taught or newly ingrained or newly learned for them. It was a part of their like core and who they are.
Yeah.
And so it's like, for me, there's like, when we consider the weight and the importance of what we do, it goes way beyond, again, the aesthetics or the UX or all of those principles. And even the purpose of something like a design week is to really hit on the importance of what design is as a fabric of our society. And if we as humans consume our world through our senses, which are like sight, taste, touch, sound, we are actually in control of some of those on a day-to-day basis. You wake up, you look at your phone. You go to work, you look at your phone. You go to work, you look at a computer. So all of these spaces we are contributing to in the shaping of them, right? And so it's like with consideration, with open-mindedness, how do we actually begin to like shape those spaces?
Yeah, I think what's so interesting too about what you're saying about how we have the power to shift people's way of seeing themselves is so powerful, because I mean, without any concrete examples, I mean, just think back to the cliche ads that you see from the 1950s and 60s. And I was just thinking about like women, you know, there was this game ad for like a board game where the son and the dad were playing a board game in the forefront of the ad, and it's like fun for the whole family. And then in the way back, you see the woman cooking. It's like, that's not fun for her. Like, she's not having a good time right now, right? So those cliche ads back in the day, like they kind of tried to tell you what box to fit into, right? And they were kind of coming from the top down. It was sort of top down design, marketing, messaging from corporations and companies, right? And it's sort of, like you said, Erwin, it's like you feel like you're part of this box that you've been pre-assigned, right? And I think what's interesting now, and I mean, it's been increasing over time, and it's just continuing to do so, which is awesome, is that, you know, not only are more voices part of the conversation, but also more people are empowered to actually contribute to the design process and to contribute to defining and stepping out of those boxes through communicating, right? Like their own design point of view or their own point of view on, you know, what they think something should be. So I feel like there's something really interesting in that groundswell around, you know, there's a big chance for us to like redefine just even the way we think about ourselves and the dimension that we have as individuals.
Yeah, and to that point, Emma, something we talked about the other day was typecasting, right? And you know, it does show up in our work, but it also shows up when we're resourcing and putting people on projects. So I think just question for the team, and especially Emma, because I know you talked about this a lot, but how do we avoid that, like putting people in a box, right? And I think something you mentioned was, because you're a woman, you might be put on a project that is geared, that a brand is geared toward just a woman. So like, or just women. So, how can we avoid that kind of pitfall of, all right, you're this, you should work on this kind of thing?
Yeah, and it's a funny thing because like we are who we are, right? So it's like, I mean, yeah, I am a woman and I like these earrings, I like this lipstick. I could work on those brands because I, relate to them, right? And I use them. So it's like you have your personal experience that you bring. It's a fine line. I don't know if I have a definitive answer about it, but I think, I think it's two things. I think it's first being open to and expressing that you have interest in working on things that may be uncomfortable to you, right? Or maybe foreign to you. And then in turn, like I really guess it's one thing, just voicing that, right? And if you feel like you're being, continue to be like, oh hey, like you're the voice for all women. What do women want?
Mhm.
Right? Yes, that's a Mel Gibson movie from the 90s, but like it's also not real. Like what women want. I don't know what all women want, because back to the point that we were talking about before, women are so diverse and so dimensional, and it's something where it's like it's okay to speak for yourself as someone who is representative of a group, but you are not the voice for that group. And I think it's just, it's a delicate balance, because you want to be able to participate in those conversations, but not only be, referred to in those conversations because of that group that you may be representative of.
Yeah, I just second that all the way. Like, I don't know if I have like much more to add that's going to like diversify that response, but this has never happened to me, but like to be put on a project just because I was Black would be, for me, offensive, because it would be actually narrowing the perspective of Blackness. And I think we recently worked on a client, and there was like slightly narrow definitions of their audience and their target audience. And it was a brand that was like focused on women. And I think as we were discussing it and talking, we just had a lot of conversations on, there's a spectrum here. It can't be broken down into these hard and fast silos that a lot of people do, because you want to feel comfortable when you're presenting and you're pitching a deck. You want people to feel comfortable with what they're presenting, and that we know them and we're going to sell these products to them, and it's going to be super obvious. But the reality is that all of these people are functioning on a spectrum now.
Yeah.
And so like for me to be put on a client that's focused on Blackness, or for Emma to be put on a client that's about women, and to think that we as individuals with our own individualized experiences that are built on top of what we look like, right? Like, yeah, I carry Blackness, but I also carry every single like micro experience that I have that's going to be different than Andrew's. So it's almost like, if you're going to do that, then you're sort of setting yourself up where you like need to almost get now you need to make sure you're covering your gamut and getting the spectrum of those experiences so that you're actually representing that.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually kind of coming full circle. Maybe I'll try to talk through it and see if it makes sense. But what we said before too about we're using the word typecasting, and we're talking about us as individuals in the workplace and our contribution as work people, right? As workers. But also like when we're talking about, workers, worker bees, like we're talking about personas. Work people. I don't know what else you call them. We just do the work.
Yeah.
And
That's illegal.
so we're talking about typecasting in the workplace, but then we also are talking about like personas, like the product of marketing or part of the marketing and design process. I mean, the commonality is that simplifying out of it is the road to like not good work, and also not good conversation, and not like furthering things, right? Like recognizing the nuances across the board is something that, again, coming back to the conversation piece, that kind of ties them together, right? It's like, you learn more and you find out more about this like, dimensional, multidimensional, and multifaceted person, and then you are able to learn and grow, right? Whether that's in the workplace or someone that you are hoping to market to or sell something to or design for, and full stop.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also think one of the things that you said too, really quick, so we don't skip over it, is that asking the individual what type of projects they want to work on is a very, very important thing. Because like, just because I don't want to only work on projects that are focused on selling things or promoting things to Black people doesn't mean another Black person doesn't want to, right? Like, I think it's important to not use one person's experience and what one person said as the definitive answer for all of that culture, and use each one of us as a representation for, or like we're representatives for our race, our culture, our gender.
Yeah, and I love what Danielle said in the comments around the Peggy Olson.
Yeah.
What a great shot.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's exactly it. You know, I mean, and that's the beauty of working in such a diverse workplace that we have, is I feel like we all like come together and we all weigh in on things that are, you know, near and dear to us, but also things that might be foreign to us just as individuals, right? Like things that I'm not familiar with. That's the stuff I want to work on, to be honest. Like,
exactly.
you know, because you know, you fall into your old patterns, and of course it feels good to be like hitting out of the park on something that you've done a million times, or, you know, a certain category or a certain type of brand. But when you get put on something that's, you know, or you ask to be put on something that is outside of your comfort zone, or something that you want to expand your horizons on, I think that's when you, not to sound cliche, but you learn the most, and then other people that you're working with, there's a really interesting dynamic that comes into play from just expanding.
I couldn't agree more. Like, Erwin, to the point that you were making earlier, like if you're working in a space where you have the authority to help people sort of get on projects, like talking to them about whether or not they're interested in it is incredibly important. But to the point you were making, Emma, earlier, I think the way I always like to think about it is a recognition that both of those perspectives are incredibly important. Like, you want a seat at the table for somebody who maybe does live a little bit of that shared culture. You know, that's really important, because you don't want misunderstanding. You want somebody who does know it and can speak to that and have a negotiation with somebody else who also has a perspective that's completely foreign. And they're both incredibly valuable in getting towards what's the objective truth in some way, shape, or form. I've been listening to Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. If you haven't read it, it's an incredibly good book. But one of the things he talks about in it is like the power of like shared language. And that's why, you know, we talk about it like, hey, you get typecast and put on a project because somebody thinks you know something. But it is an incredibly powerful tool to understand a culture and be able to speak a shared language. And in the case that we think about, like a shared value system with, hey, this is what's going to resonate. That's really important. But I do think it's, to the point you're making, it's the inclusiveness of, but I also want to include the opinion and perspective of a person who's never even touched this before, because it's incredibly childlike and honest in terms of like their interpretation of that culture, which is really powerful, because I think even from the inside, you never really understand the truth of it, right? Like you don't have a broad enough perspective to really understand like, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way. So I think at the end of the day, it's like, how do you embrace it all and bring it all in?
Totally. And like what you're saying is like, you know, humility is kind of like prerequisite to learning, right? And so when you come in with that perspective, that's when things are awesome, you know?
Totally. And going back to the idea of like nuance and, you know, individual experiences, we talk a little about, you know, demographics and all that. And in my mind, I feel like that's kind of an outdated model of thinking, just because obviously all of us here are so much more than our demographic, you know, 18 to 24, like race, all that is kind of just BS, to be honest. So someone in the Q&A actually asked about this specific thing where, you know, how can we shift from those like old demographics or personas to more of like psychographics and mindsets? So, and does anyone care to talk about that a little bit and just how we can make that shift, you know, a little more seamless?
Yeah, I think the way that, like, again, going back to like the concept of demographics, what's really interesting is like, it is the least human way of going about things, yet on an aggregate scale, it sometimes can be effective. I think like it's proven to be effective, right? At the end of the day, it's like thinking about a broad group of people from a demographic, and somewhat to a psychographic, any sort of like oversimplification of a broad group of people into one bulleted list is our way of saying, how would we think about these people in a non-conversational way, and how would we think about them like a computer would think about them? It's like it's the least human way of really trying to get to know people. And so I find that like the most interesting things have happened in the process, like when you actually talk to people at the end of the day, because when you just look at data, like, is it effective? Is it true? Yes, it is. Like, frankly, like there are truths that can come out of that. But the really interesting, enlightening, and inspiring pieces are like when you talk to people who participate in those communities or those cultures, and you hear like, oh, there's this really interesting thing that I never expected, and that inspires you to do something different or interesting with that culture, versus the data tells us that this culture wants to see this thing, so let's use this demographic stat.
It's so true. And I mean, thinking about just like, I mean, there's a whole conversation we had about research types and the role they play and all these types of things. But I mean, I think a short response to that also is like, yeah, qualitative research, conversations. I mean, no one invented, well, I'm not going to quote myself on this, but I would say that no one really probably invented a new brand, company, product just based on assumption alone, right? I mean, and that's the kind of, they talk to people. It's an insight that comes from a conversation where it says, hey, my old luggage wasn't working, or I don't even have a luggage that I like. Every time I go somewhere, it breaks. And someone said, wait a minute, that we can make really cool luggage that is like sexy and fun and accessible. And then Away was born, right? And now it's a multi-million-dollar company, right? Because they talked to their friends. Actually, that girl, I listened to that How I Built This with Guy Raz episode with her. And she was literally like crowdsourcing her purchase around, because she was actually traveling a lot, and she had this horrible incident where she was running through an airport and her thing burst open, her luggage burst open, and her underwear were trailing behind her, and she didn't even know for like 10 minutes, and people were chasing her with her undergarments to the airport. So she started crowdsourcing, like, hey, does anyone have a good luggage brand for me? I really need something that's going to last. And then through Facebook Messenger, people started recommending or saying, like, hey, there's nothing. I don't have anything good. I can recommend you go to TJ Maxx, or here's a $5,000 suitcase. And she's like, no and no. So that's where it was born, right? And it's like even just these human conversations, like research aside, like kind of like, we call it man on the street research, but like talking to each other, talking to friends, like that's also where I think no matter what the end goal is, whether it be a brand or a business or a design, that's like also where the richness comes in too.
Yeah, I mean, I second it. It's like when I take it back to just like my everyday life, right? Like you don't really know anything until you really like live it. Like you can watch a movie that's based out of Italy. You can, I don't know, read a book, do some research or whatever. But until you like spend time in that culture and just like live it at the end of the day, that's when you really start to get a sense of like, I guess your own perception or understanding of it in a really nuanced way. And the equivalent to like the space that we work is like, we often try, like, because of deadlines, because of timelines, like we try and cram so much exposure or just like information gathering through like tools. Like we want to take aggregate data and go like, it tells us this or that. But it's like, it would be so much more effective to take the time to embrace that culture, be open to it, immerse yourself in it. We always talk about immersion or discovery, but like if that was really drawn up in a proper way, like you would go be in that culture and you would go and understand and talk to people. And it's like, that's the most effective and interesting ways of approaching those problems.
Yeah. And I think I just want to acknowledge Peter's question in the comments too, before we move on, or if we're moving on. But I mean, it's a great question. Like, I want to say, like, he asked, how would an agency comprised of only men approach work for a brand whose market and users are primarily women? And I think, just to like revisit what I was saying, like, while you don't want to be typecast and you want to be considered representative, I think be curious and go talk to women that you know and be respectful and ask, hey, have you ever done something like this? Have you ever used something like this, right? Or, I'm working on this and I would love your insight. I respect your opinion. I would love to know more about this because I think you might know something, right? I think, it's not like, I just want to say what I said before. It's like, I don't want to be, unapproachable because yeah, I am one, like I said. And if you want to ask me, like, please do. I'm not going to say, no way, are you typecasting me? It's like, no, like definitely please ask. It's just, I think it's the approach, right? And that's, again, coming back to what we just said, it's conversation, right? And I think it's just the intent and the approach that really do set the tone for how that will go.
Yeah. And I think that goes to a larger conversation that's also happening right now, which is like recognizing your own internal bias or unconscious bias. And we actually had that experience where when we were like just starting, it was like me, Andrew, Matt, Eric Rossell, and Arthur, and we worked on a brand called Nybar. And that was a brand that was actually focused on millennial women. And that's something that we actually discovered from going to sit in the stores and seeing who was buying the product that they were going to be selling. And then from that, we had to like get out of the way and allow those stories to actually come to light and resonate. So we had to honestly become conduits for someone else's story. And I think that that is the most important thing to recognize as a creator. And to what Andrew and Emma were just saying is like, it's about spending time in the culture with the people. That's the only time you can actually feel something. When you look at people as data, it's hard to get rid of your internal bias because you're literally like reinforcing most of your internal bias or unconscious bias with data. When you're sitting with people, understanding, listening to what they're going through right now. Also, data is like from the past. It's never going to be like right now, today, what's happening right now. And so in sitting with people and understanding them, then you're actually able to let that go through the filter of your actual feelings. And as a creator, again, that's our most powerful tool, right? And then once it does that and we get out of the way, then we can actually create something that's a little bit more honest and can resonate with those individuals and continuously gut checking it with those people, with that audience, as opposed to like, just know you don't know anything, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I feel like in the industry we're in, this is what we do. I mean, almost every project I get on, like the most, like to your point, Emma, like the most exciting part for me is like when I get on a project and I'm like, I don't know shit about this, right? Like it's really interesting to be like, oh, I want to talk to people, right? I can think of like two things off the top of my head. We worked recently, you know, our agency is like pretty young, but we recently worked with a company called Great Call, which was hardware and products built for the elderly or built for people with like cognitive disabilities or just aging, you know, issues that we're going with, vision impaired, right? Like many of us don't deal with that on a day-to-day basis. So what you do in order to try and have empathy and sympathy for them is like conversation, talk to them, go through exercises. We had these glasses that were given to us that we could experience the world in a way that was similar to somebody who had vision impaired. And okay, let's go through this. Let me try and use my phone and feel what they feel. You're never going to get the real experience, right? It's always secondary to a firsthand experience, but you can get as close as you possibly can and spend as much time as you can to immerse yourself in that culture. I mean, it's the same thing when I'm not a musician. We worked with Fender guitars and we worked with their employees. I'm definitely not an employee who sells Fender guitars. I spent a week going from Guitar Center to Guitar Center, talking to their employees on a one-to-one basis to understand like just what is it that goes through your mind on a day-to-day. And it's really approaching these things with, to that point, acknowledging you don't know much and that your perspective is not important in this situation or not as important. It's useful. Like to that point, like because it's an outside perspective, it is useful and you can probably provide some interesting insight, but only when you properly understand what the people you're trying to speak to are going through at the same time.
Yeah, real quick, we do have 20 minutes, so I think we're going to pivot in like 5 minutes to get to these questions because we do have kind of a boatload. But I guess just another question from me and something that I know we've talked about a lot, Erwin, is this like ongoing not battle, but like debate between art and design and what role kind of inclusion and equity has to play within those two seemingly disparate fields. So Erwin, could you shed some light on that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is something that like for me, I guess I have always had tension with the idea that there is no art and design or that art and design are completely disparate and different from one another. For me, art and great art throughout history has, yes, been personal, but it's always been a reflection of the thoughts, feelings, and emotions of current society. And it oftentimes, if done right and properly, acts as a mirror, reflecting society back to itself in a palatable way. Oftentimes, like very tension-ridden issues and things that are hard to take in, but it makes it palatable so that we can accept it and see it. And that's what great art does. That's what like Basquiat did, right? But over time, art did become inaccessible. whether it be through galleries, and only those who had money can now see art and accept art and like appreciate art. And if you had like proper studying and all of that stuff, or proper education around like art history, then you can appreciate it. For me, design is in the same vein, right? Like, yes, we do it for clients, but like I was saying at the top of this, there is a deep responsibility that I feel like I have, and I think designers have, to act in the same way, and to recognize that we are reflecting the thoughts, emotions, and feelings of society back to itself. And albeit it's more intentional, because artists are oftentimes doing it because like they're like super sensitive, and they're in touch with like almost the zeitgeist unconsciously. So they're expressing like the universal sentiment and universal feeling. We study it, and then we have to express it, but we're still doing the same thing. And like I was saying, there's so much power in that, to actually create space, create shifts, create conversation within culture. And when we recognize that there is still the artist that's needed in design, then I think we can approach it more responsibly, because we're not just approaching it from the standpoint of like data, number. We're actually approaching it from the standpoint of emotion is still the most important thing in creating the story, creating the moment, and then data just helps you make it more efficient. Data cannot create the emotion. It cannot create the feeling. And that's what gets people to buy. That's what gets people to want to tune in. That's what gets people to want to scroll down a website. Like, emotion is what gets us to do things. The data, again, doesn't create emotion. So for me, art and recognizing you are still an artist is important. And the fact that we begin to remove that and want to see ourselves as something different, it limits the power that designers have in ourselves to actually have impact on society beyond just like making a website. Yeah, a website is a website, but when you look at a website from the point of view of an artist and see the cultural impact and the mesh impact that it actually has on society, it becomes, you hold yourself to a higher standard, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, just to come back right to the kind of the prompt that you posed, Eric, I agree with a lot of the points that you said, Erwin. And I think what I see art and design as one thing. I see them, I mean, in my opinion, right, like offering just, kind of a different thing to what you said, Eric. Like, I see the difference when you point out like, something in like a gallery versus something that you might be holding in your hand, or something that you might be reading and reacting to, right? There's more of like that real time, or more hands-on, even in some literal senses, like communication. But I think the biggest thing that differentiates it, at its core, as Erwin said, I mean, design is art, right? And I think that art is design as well, and they kind of go hand in hand. The thing that differentiates it for us and what we do in our industry, where someone like Basquiat or someone like Jackson Pollock or any other kind of medium that's, art medium, they don't have like an agenda. Agenda is a loaded word, but they don't have, they're making art, as Erwin said, to express themselves, to comment on a universal condition, to whatever it may be, right? Just to fight for them, whatever it is, right? And they have a point of view, right? But it's definitely also much more up for interpretation, I believe, by the viewer. And whereas we have commerce as our agenda, we are selling things to people, mainly, at least in our industry. And design is wider than that too, of course. Like, design can be a term that's applied to other things, but when it comes to creating a website or creating a marketing campaign, like, there is something in the back of our heads that's saying, hey, how do we keep the integrity of the design open and spread, new ideas, and open the aperture on people's worldview, but also still hit on these points of the things that we need to sell. And at the bottom, at the end of the day, like, the bottom line of what we're trying to communicate is to sell products, as everyone said. So I think that is, like, to me, the most interesting thing about, and, I think we had another discussion about this, which I might be segueing into, but like, how do we maintain that integrity and also still deliver on, on commerce and the things that we are actually, on the hook for.
Yeah. I would like, and to follow up like a little bit on what you're saying, like, art to me is a little bit more fundamental. I mean, you're saying this, like, art is like pure, right? Design is pointed. Design has an objective. Design has whatever. I always think of like art as a synonym for message. medium aside, whatever, like art is message, whatever that is, whether that's expression from you or whether that's the artwork that you do. It's like you're trying to, there's something being said through whatever. Sometimes that's poetry, sometimes that is, you know, it is that thing. And there is almost always artistry in design. I think that's like to the point that you were making. It's like there's a lot of fuzziness between the two, but I do think that like when you think about it in a traditional sense, maybe an artist is just maybe their message is more self-initiated versus design can be problem solving. When we think about the idea of like commercial art where people pay us to get an objective or a job done or a problem solved, we use artistry in order to serve that sort of purpose or point. But you're right, like the integrity involved in that process, the integrity involved in that, like recognizing like the process of design has artistry in it, and we as participators in that process like really do need to consider like how do we maintain that integrity. I think that like many people do, you know, in our space, like when they're commercial artists or designers, they try and apply their value system to make sure that integrity is intact in the work that they do, whether that be who they work with, the messages that they support. You know, right? Like, look, there's designers who support both political campaigns every year, all the time. Like messages, those are like, how do we deliver a message effectively? So people have to check that against their value system. People do have to check that against their own integrity. But I don't know, outside of like really considering your own value system and the ultimate end goal of what you're doing. Like if you are effective in whatever your objective is, whether that's through art or design, will you be happy with what happens? You know, are you satisfied with what happens or satisfied with yourself?
Yeah. And I will say, you know, not even just the conversation about art versus design, art versus commerce, but this whole topic is super nuanced, super layered. And unfortunately, you can't answer all these, you know, world's questions in an hour. You know, there's too much to talk about, right? But I think we should move into these questions real fast before we end things. So, question from Daniel Rubio is curious about the criteria Basic considers when choosing clients to take on. So, would anyone like to take a stab at that?
I mean, I will say one thing I've noticed, like specific to Basic, and knowing, you know, Matt really well, I think ultimately it comes down to like what we were just talking about. What is it? There's a lot of criterias, right? Like, does it match with our employees' value system? Is it something that people are going to find interesting? I think the question we were just talking about is, if we're effective in what we do, are we happy with the result or the world that is created in doing so? If we perpetuate this concept or idea, do we feel like we've progressed society from a value system, or have we done something that hurts it or harms it? An example I'll give is like we had opportunities to work with cigarette companies, and it's not to say that all of that's necessarily bad or a value system, but I think like ultimately like there has been times where we've turned people down because ultimately like if we do what we do really well, that means that we perpetuate something that maybe a company has seen as harmful. And I think that, you know, that while that's like a very case by case situation, it's been very important, at least what I've seen from Matt, from our leadership, from our executive team with the criteria or that filter, like there's a decision tree that's like, do we want to work on this? Will we be happy with, one, the work? Are we excited about it? Will our people be excited about it? But two, like the world that we'll be creating and perpetuating by helping this message move forward.
Right. Like you can learn a lot about someone by the company they keep, right? And if you're the sum of like the 5 people that you spend the most time with, right? It's like that, I think, is something that we also, like you're saying, take into consideration, right? I mean, at the end of the day, what we do is amazing and fun and such a privilege and such an amazing industry to work in. But like, you know, values and morals and who we are as people, I think is something that we value over a shiny or a shiny client, right? Even if they're going to pay, you know, huge retainer, or they're going to, you know, get us through the next 3 years because of this amazing campaign. If we don't align with their values, we're not going to take it, because that's not who we are. And as individuals and as a collective team, we all care about the work that we do. And so none of us would feel right working on something that we felt, and I'm not speaking for everyone, I would just assume, like, I don't think we would feel right? Like working on something that we didn't believe in, or that we felt totally misaligned with.
Totally. Second question from Randall Hollis is there any risk in moving culture forward within a model of marketing which is often driven and perceived as catering to corporate incentive and being bottom line driven? In other words, how can we trust the intentions?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a tough one. I mean, I think we could have a whole hour talking just about that alone. I mean, my 2 cents on that is, I think, you know, we're in a place now that, I mean, just look at Instagram. I'm going to use a really like simple example of just like what I thought of when I was just reading that. Like, you are now on a platform, if you're subscribing to using Instagram and you want to be part of the cultural conversation happening on Instagram, you are in the midst of people, family members, your uncles, your aunts, whoever you got on there, and then whoever you blocked on there. And then you also have the brands, right? And the companies that are selling to you, sponsored ads and things kind of coming around, right? All in the same ecosystem. And so I think there's almost a sense of like, I don't know if trust is the word as much as just having, kind of being able to like discern, you know, what you pay attention to and what, you know, you want to give your attention to. And I don't know if that's exactly answering your question, but I think, you know, in terms of like what we trust, we also have to create the brands that we trust. We have to follow the brands that we trust. And I think then we're able to create our own ecosystem in which, in a good way, in which we, like, even similar to the conversation about our agency and who we work with, that we trust those companies and those brands that we're working with and that we also use. And, you know, those that we don't include, right? We have that choice now. We don't have to be buying the same that you see on the shelf at the store. You have a million options for any number of things now, right? So I think you have the opportunity to kind of create your own thing in that way.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would follow that by saying, like, as customers and the creators of the brands that people purchase, we can vote with our dollar and with our support. But on the other side, we can also be, and again, I firmly stand behind this, we should be lobbyists for culture within these organizations. Mm-hmm. And like I was saying at the top, I'm just going to keep on referencing this. While the things we create are driven by commerce, the world is driven by commerce, and the reality, that's just the reality. But the fact that those commerce things drive our world also mean that they're shaping, again, the perception of the world that we live in. And so one example that I was like talking about yesterday is, I'm sure more kids played basketball who were from the inner city when Jordan became the poster boy for Nike. And so at that point, Nike put a Black person as their poster boy. More people saw that as their way or their road or their opportunity. And so media, although it's used for commerce, can actually create space and create opportunity if used right and if done intentionally and if communicated authentically. And so I think this is like a summation of everything that we've talked about. If we get out of the way and hold space for the actual customer and act as a platform for that actual customer and create things with that actual customer in mind and allow their voices to shine, then we can actually help these brands become platforms for their customer and support that individual who should be supporting them, right? So to me, we're in a space of commerce. We're in a space where we are actually controlling the marketing and advertising behind the commerce and the strategy behind the commerce. So I think it's recognizing that power that we have within these organizations to actually create organizational and marketing shifts to be more equitable, to be more diverse, to tell more nuanced and holistic stories. So it's literally like, and especially in the moment now, it's like everybody knows they need to be more diverse. So it's literally like, it makes sense for them to do it. So now they're like more open to listening. And while it sucks that it took this situation for them to listen, they are listening. And now it's time to like push and really be the lobbyist for culture in these different organizations.
100%.
Love that.
Sorry guys, I'll take one more question from Instagram because I know we're getting close to time here, but and I think it's also a real nice like end cap to our conversation. So what do you all think are some real permanent changes that might result from this period of transition that we're going through, you know, this current cultural climate? What do you think is going to be the result of all this and the impact?
Damn, which part?
Right?
Yeah, design and life.
What's going to be the cultural impact of?
Just like this period of transition that we're going through.
It's a really good one.
I know.
So it's like from me, I think going all the way back to like the start of COVID,
Mhm.
I think that with the start of COVID, you actually had one, besides the whole divisiveness and the polarization that happened with COVID, which is something that we've always talked about, that honestly happens because we have all of these different media platforms and all we do is consume the same content based on the algorithms that forces into these silos. It just got worse. But on a positive side, I think that what happened with COVID is it forced and created opportunity for us and desire for everybody to want to focus on small business and support small business. And then I think as BLM became, as BLM started to come about and really take shape over this time, it went from just supporting small businesses just because they're small businesses to now supporting small businesses who are doing something for the community. So it's almost refocusing on companies that are actually corporate citizens and giving back and supporting the communities that you are actually involved in and live in. And so I think that that is going to be one of the things. So as we talk about platform brands being platforms for the consumers that are supporting them, I just think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see more brands actually not being scared to really prop up their customer base and to be public about the things that they're doing within the community to support that sub community group, i.e. like Lowe's, right? Lowe's is supporting and helping to rebuild Black small businesses. They have a Black CEO. So it's just like I think we're just going to see more of that. We're going to see more caring about where people are actually like coming from, what they're actually doing, what's behind the scenes even more. Like people already cared about sustainability. Like this was like it was like a pattern that was already happening, and COVID literally just like put it on hyperdrive. Yeah. COVID and BLM put it on hyperdrive.
I also think too, at a more existential level, and I agree with everything that Erwin said. I think when you asked that question, what came to my mind at the highest level was, I think we've experienced, like, we're in a unique year for a variety of reasons. It's an election year, which promises to divide people even further, especially in this country. But we've also been kind of faced with these things that actually hope to bring us together, right? And I think there's a sense of like forced vulnerability that happens specifically with COVID and when, with everything going on with social injustice, right? Like people are expressing themselves and there's a sense of solidarity. Sorry, my dog wants to be on camera right now as well. There's a sense of solidarity that I think we've kind of almost like had to be part of, right? Yeah. Like we have to express, hey, we're all in this together, right? And I think that in the long term, I don't know exactly where that's going to take us, but I think there's a sense of optimism that we have to maintain in order to continue to grow together. And like, I think it's on each of us, I think it's also forced companies and corporations to also be vulnerable and also be more human and unedited and not perfect and not, we've already seen that trend, but coming into this now, it's like, we're just going to continue to do that. And I think that opens up the potential for further conversation, learning, and growth.
Yeah. I'll just add like a 2-second thing in case you want to add anything. I know we're out of time, but I do feel like we're going through a world of like hyper tribalism, right? Where everything is sort of happening. And this is like to an extent of like technology, right? Like we have so many more tools for expressing ourselves, and we also have so many more tools for seeing the expressions of others. And so our exposure to that wider variety of ideas and perspectives is amplified in some way, but it's also amplified in a really tribalistic way. So our interpretation of being exposed to new ideas is not like how we would generally get exposed to those ideas, like via conversation, or me having an experience with Emma and talking about, you know, her experience versus mine. It is in this sort of like disconnected, I don't know, just we have the strangest human experience, specifically this year. Like it was already weird because of everything going on with technology and the way that we socialize and interact with one another. But specifically this year,
Yeah.
there's just so much tension built up. And I do think that like that will play out on a brand level to the point that Erwin was making. It's like it's like nationalism on a mini scale with like the brands that you associate with, that you identify with, will be that all that much more important to all of us.
Totally. Well, that about wraps everything up. I know we do have like a million more other questions from Instagram in this Q&A. I think we could probably just answer those on Instagram sometime later. But I do want to thank, first of all the panelists for joining us today, and obviously all the attendees. We had about, I don't know, 150. So it was amazing to see everyone here and really have everyone listen in on our conversation, a super important conversation that, you know, needs to be had. And obviously we won't have all the answers in an hour. So definitely keep this conversation going with us. You know, we have Instagram, Twitter, @Basic Agency. Please like reach out, DM us. Let's keep the chat going, and let's keep this movement going.
Yeah, we also do our brand beats.
Brand beats as well. Yep.
We also do our brand beats like every week. No, not shameless.
And also way less formal than this. Yeah.
Yeah. But like tune into that, ask us any questions, and like Erik was saying, we're always here to just like conversate, build, and contribute. So ask away. Let's talk.
For sure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Deuces.